Welcome to the Open to Hope and Compassionate Friends webinar. We're talking today on multiple loss, and this is Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my mom, Dr. Gloria Horsley. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Heidi.
Welcome to the webinar. We have a fabulous guest. Mom and I are here to bring you one of our favorite people. Her name is Cathy Seehuetter, and she is a past board member of Compassionate Friends. She is very, very involved in the grief and loss world, and she is such an incredible example of someone that has found hope again after loss, despite losing 2 children. And she's such a positive person, as you know, Mom, and does so many things for people that are grieving. She also just ran a regional conference in Minnesota, and I was able to attend, and it was a fabulous conference. And so, like I said, she does an incredible amount, and she also works for the Compassionate Friends.
Cathy, why don't we go to the next slide and take a look at your family?
Oh, yep. My Nina and Christopher. It's even all these years. It's been actually 20 and a half years since my daughter Nina died. She was 15 years old. She was just, a spark in everybody's life. I don't know how to really describe that other than to say that, when Nina walked into a room, she leaped into a room. She just, embraced life, even as a really young person so early. She was way wise beyond her years. And sometimes I wondered who was the parent, who was the child in that relationship. But she was 15, and we were going to our first family vacation in a really long time to Orlando, and it was my husband Gray and my son Dan, who's younger than Nina, and Nina. And she was so involved with things at school and actually even in the community. She was Miss Teen Cottage Grove, and she was president of her freshman class. And, if there was something out there to do, that Nina was doing it.
Cathy, I just want to say that your daughter led such a full life. And, all the pictures that you post of her, you can tell that she walks in and just has this aura around her and this energy about her. And like you said, she was a beauty queen, and you also said president of her class?
She was president of her class, yes, she
That's
was.
amazing.
And then the student council. She was a peer counselor for Park High School. She taught catechism. She was, she was just a real leader type. But the thing about Nina is that she was really a friend to all. And, I think one thing that really impressed me with her, with this whole Miss Teen thing, the reason that she ran for this is because it was very, very much into community service. It was about community service and being a representative for her city, for youth. And
Cathy,
that's what really appealed to her.
You know what really strikes me when you talk about this is how you have served in her name, and I know you do it with joy. And I want people to know that it has been many years for us, but we do serve with joy, and we smile when we look at her picture. I am smiling looking at her picture because someone said to me, I've tuned into your shows and they're so sad, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that you don't realize we smile when we see their picture.
We do.
Love it. We love talking about them.
She had a great smile, with her braces-laden grin that she had. And they told her, don't smile like that because, that's going to take points down because of your braces. And she said, no way, that's me. I smile. I don't care about my braces. She was killed by a drunk driver. Yes, she was over vacation. It was also my birthday. It was my birthday that she died. And that's another little complication along the line. But she did. She was killed by a drunk driver, yes. We were on the way to celebrate my birthday, and we were just
about Christopher now. 3.5 years ago, he was in the military. He was a policeman, right?
Yes, he was an undercover police officer, right.
Yeah, we wanted to highlight the fact that he was your stepson because it was very important for you to lose your stepson. I mean, sometimes people think, oh,
yes.
But it's not that way, is it?
No, and Nina was my husband's stepdaughter, but he loved her the same too. And so that always, I got a taste of how he felt because he always heard, how's Cathy? And, oh, well, gee, it was just your stepdaughter. And that was really hurtful to him. And so I really got an understanding from when Christopher died that, no, I see how Greg felt when Nina died, that they really kind of discount a step-parent's love for that child.
And Cathy, I'm glad that you're bringing this up because we've had this conversation, you and I, before. My daughter's adopted, and, you know, she's not biologically my daughter, but she is my daughter in every single way, and I love her just as much as I love my biological son. So,
That's
like
true.
you said, I love that you're bringing up the point that losing Christopher was just as significant a loss as losing Nina. These were both your children.
They were both my children. I love what someone said to me one time is that Christopher was the son that was born in your heart, and I thought that was really a beautiful thing, because that is exactly how I feel about it. You know, I was devastated when Christopher died.
Now, Christopher took his own life, right? With his
he did.
Police revolver.
Yes, he did, with his own police revolver, which of course brings up a lot of gun issues that we won't go into, but he had easy access to that, and totally out of the blue. We just had no clue.
And I know that you've talked to me before about Christopher because he was a pretty amazing guy. I mean, he was in an incredible job.
He was undercover, which comes along with a whole lot of post-traumatic stress disorder type things, because undercover, you can't talk about it. And really, truly, I think it's getting better now, but in the police force, you didn't talk about those kind of things. That's something that you had to keep inside. And so the atrocities and things that they see every day on their job, and not being able to really discuss them, that has to take an incredible toll on you. And that's why the suicide rate's so high with police officers, sort of almost equal to the military, for that same reason. So though we don't know, we don't even really have a clue as to why Chris took his own life. It was just a shock that, the police officers at the door knocking at 5:30 in the morning. We were just astounded and assumed that it was probably something as an undercover officer that's we expected that something like that could happen, but then to hear that he took his own life, that was just, it's unspeakable.
I wanted to take a comment somebody has made to us already. She says, I am entering this session with someone who has recently experienced 3 significant losses. Wow. And I'm sorry to hear that. Would I be correct to lead her to dealing or identifying with loss that brings her the most pain? That's an interesting question.
Wow, that is.
Do you agree that, I mean, if you feel guilt or shame or angry, those losses can be powerful many, many years later, and we talk about how your brain relives them as though they're now. So it's hard to
say. They truly do.
Yeah, it's hard to say which loss is going to be the most difficult. I don't think time can be the factor.
Yeah, I don't really see how, that was the one thing too, is that was a question one time to me, which was harder, did you have a comparison, which was more difficult between the two, and how can you even really say, each special one has its own unique type situation behind it, the relationship you have with them. I mean, there is really no way to compare a loss. So, Nina, that was 20 and a half years ago, and as Heidi and Gloria, you both know, I'm making my daughter's life be remembered. I want you, and that's
Cathy,
why I post those things.
Cathy, I'm also wondering if when Christopher died and you were grieving for him, if sometimes it would trigger a lot of emotions about Nina also and bring you back into earlier parts of your grief with Nina, and also maybe sometimes you'd be grieving for both of them, and then maybe sometimes you wouldn't even know which one you were grieving for.
That's really excellent, Heidi. No, I think that's very, very true. And I think anytime that there's, even when there's a celebrity loss, or there's, like the Paris or San Bernardino, whenever there's a tragedy like that, I think it really does bring you back to your own specific loss. You're sort of feeling those emotions all over again. So
However,
it does.
Let me say one thing about this so that people know this. One thing that Cathy and Heidi and I know, particularly about our losses that are further down the road, is that we now know that was then, our brains know that was then that Nina died, and this is now. I am here now.
Yes, it's true. You rebound faster from those intense places of emotion and pain. You're able to move out of them quicker than you were initially. Because initially, when you get into a place like that, it's hard. It sometimes can ruin your entire day. It's hard to move out of those feelings. But as time goes on, it's easier.
The thing too is that when Christopher died, I had said that, to Greg that same day, I said, Greg, the difference between now and with Nina, even at, that early part of it, I said, with Nina, I really didn't expect to survive. I thought, this is it, I'm not going to live any longer. I said, at least we know now that, yes, this is going to be a horrible experience here for us, but we know that somehow we're going to get through it. And that was the one thing that I saw that was different with Chris than when Nina died.
I wanted to get into, and we've talked to you about it before, the issues related to suicide versus automobile death.
People are more supportive when the victim of a crash did not cause. People may blame the victim or family after a suicide. People may have an unspoken why after suicide, stigma of suicide, and changing the language around suicide.
So, Kath, you want to take
That's
those?
a lot, isn't it? Well, I think probably the person who died did not cause a crash. I think that's what we're saying, is that there's this kind of a separation there. When Nina died, my house was filled with people supporting us. I mean, truthfully, there wasn't a minute that there weren't tons of people in our home, and brought food, and the support of the community was just overwhelming. And if you want to contrast that to when Chris died, I can probably count on two hands how many people came to our house after he died. And to me, it was just such a stark contrast, telling me that, yes, I mean, it's difficult for people to come and talk, they don't know what to say to you. But in that situation, it was really quite a well-known thing when Nina died. She was quite well known in our town, and she was also 15 and attended high school, and so she was well known in the community. Whereas Chris was 39, and was married and lived elsewhere. But also, even the number of cards or the number of phone calls, there was just a drop in the bucket compared to when Nina did, because I think for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because of the stigma behind suicide.
I think
they were both sudden.
Yeah. I think that's important, Cathy, for people that are watching this webinar to know. Let's make a special effort to get together, to contact family members where there has been a suicide. I think sometimes people are nervous about asking or commenting, or that they don't know what to say.
Like Cathy's pointing out, I mean, what a contrast, and families really, really need support, and especially families where someone died by suicide, because the community is less likely to even bring it up or even say I'm sorry or even mention it, because they're not sure what to do, because there is that stigma.
I was just going to say, sometimes the family, getting to the next one, is wondering why themselves and feeling, what's going on. There's some confusion around the whole situation. And I found that people aren't even sure they killed themselves for a while. If they're your family member, it's hard to cope with that.
I'm kind of a realist, even though I didn't see it coming. I don't know, it was just maybe a feeling that I had after it happened that, well, look at what he does for his job. And because I was a little bit more, I think maybe because I was a little bit more aware of things that can happen from being in Compassionate Friends for so many years, and hearing the many stories that we hear. And I knew a lot of people whose children had died by suicide.
Especially around the idea that maybe people could be murdered too. Maybe it wasn't
true.
For some people, maybe there might be questions: was this a suicide, or was this a murder, or was this an accidental death?
Or was it an accident?
Those three questions for people.
There's always. I think one of the things that I found in going to Compassionate Friends, the longer I'm there, and I have a chapter, and I know, Cathy, you have a chapter, and one of the things that I found, and I want people to know this, when you first come, it feels very important how your family member died. But as time goes on, it's not so important anymore. It's more
absolutely.
And it's really not that, not that relevant.
It
We
isn't.
all
No.
miss them.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. We all had our own personal relationship with that person. It was our own personal loss, and that's what it becomes. Just supporting each other, and the the why it happened or the how it happened is just not relevant really anymore. I think that's true, Gloria. Good point.
It's only a moment in time. How they lived is that's what we want to embrace, because that we spent far more time with them around how they lived. How they died was just a moment in time.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to always mention all the time with Chris is please don't remember the last page of his story. What about all the previous, 300 or 38 years plus before then, of his life? I mean, why the one page? I think really strongly about that, and I think you're right about that with Compassion Friends. We don't really talk about how it happened so much.
Yeah. Well, we have somebody came in with a question. A friend of mine who's a single mom discovered that her only child had suicided last week. Her last living parent died a year ago. Her pet also recently died a few months ago. I gave her your resource information. And what else do you suggest that she do? And what can her friends do or say? She has lost so much so early in life. Wow. And that is so, my heart goes out to people who are parents of no living children because they're
Yes.
still parents, and we know
Yes.
that, and they need a lot of support. There's a wonderful organization called
Live Alone.
Alive Alone, I'm sorry,
Live
and
alone.
Kay
Yes.
Brevington. Have her go on Kay
Mhm.
Brevington's site, Alive Alone, and also, of course, attend Compassionate Friends. Talk about
Well,
changing.
Mom,
Yeah,
can I say something about this?
yeah.
This because this is such an important thing. This woman has lost a parent, her pet, and her child, and I want to make
Mhm.
sure that she's not alone,
Right.
because that is a
Yes.
lot of loss in a very, very short period of time, which
It really
can be a
is.
concern to me as someone that's a psychologist working in this field. So I'd want to get support for her and make sure that she's got people around her. She may need to see somebody right now for counseling, just to talk about it, because it is a lot of loss. I mean,
Let's
she may
bring
not
her.
if she has the right support in place, but I don't know what her support system looks like.
So a conference going on, Cape Ebbington, they're having a conference for parents of no surviving children in April in loving memory. I believe it's in Virginia. So that might also be something they might want to look into. And, www.compassionfriends.org.
Kathy, you had something about changing the language around suicide. Was that connected with some people think that it should be called died by suicide rather than committed suicide?
Right. I even knew that before Chris died. I read a lot of things about that because I wanted to be sure that the people that came into our chapter whose children did die by suicide, how they felt about that. And I was actually part of a board task force on how to better help our people who's lost children to suicide. And that's one of the things that is really difficult is the language, people saying that so-and-so committed suicide. And, committed sort of gives that connotation that it was a crime. And unfortunately, years ago, history tells us that in Western societies that there was a belief that suicide was criminal or sinful or a sign of a character weakness or a result of some evil force, and actually they convicted and they imprisoned family members, if you can believe it, if one of their family members died by suicide.
Wow,
and so,
I never knew this.
Well, the churches refused to do funerals for them. They wouldn't allow them to be buried in the church graveyard. They would, straightforward say, your loved one is not going to heaven because they sinned. And they were really shunned. I know that they even would have to bury their child outside of the property of the church. So that really has carried over along the way. And I can actually say when I first came back after Chris died, and I first came back to my chapter, and we went around and did our introductions, and I said, I've just lost my stepson to suicide. I mean, people just audibly gasped. And it was sort of like they didn't, they sort of stayed away from me. I could really feel it. And I even found that even when I went to my first national conference afterward, people that I've known for years, they don't know how to handle that. And they do look at it as as it's a blame game.
I'm also wondering, Cathy, with that in mind, if because Nina died and then you had a second child die, and it scares people.
Have you done something, did you do something to deserve this? Are you cursed? I mean, truthfully, I did hear a lot of that sort of thing, and there is a lot of fear behind that. And Cook, who's a wonderful, wonderful man, and so wise, he said that actually now the Associated Press has suggested in their guidelines that the media use died by suicide rather than committed. And that's a big step. Because a lot of people just, they'll mimic what they hear on the news, and when they say committed, they think that's what they're supposed to say.
Let's move on to the emotions related to loss. And let's talk about shame, because I think that people are surprised when they hear that we all felt a bit of shame. And no matter how our kids died.
And I've got to say something, Mom. I think shame cuts across to siblings too, because I, for some reason, was embarrassed when Scott died. I don't know why. I felt embarrassed and strange about the fact that my brother died.
And then we get into a lot of anger, and anger can practically kill you if there's too much anger going on. Because, I mean, like you could have been, the guy who hit Nina's car died too. But boy, do we know some angry people, the people where the other kids grow up and get married and all that. It's hard to deal with some of those feelings. I'm sure when you see other kids having a life, or other women with their husbands or whatever, and somebody else, or medical error, I mean, holding on to that anger can really be tough.
Well, I'm thinking for Cathy too. I mean, Cathy, in your situation, Nina was killed by a drunk driver. And I imagine you had a lot of anger around this person that was driving drunk.
And the funny thing about that is that, well, first of all, he died too, and so I get a really different reaction from people, like, oh, gee, you should be relieved that, at least he died. And yes, and I understand why they feel that, but he did take my daughter with him, my innocent daughter, so that was really, really hard. But I have to say I was really angry at God. That's kind of where I aimed it, my anger. And I'm beyond that now for a lot of different reasons, but that was my first person. I thought, I've been a good person. I love this child. I gave her my heart and soul, and then you took her away from me. She was the love of my life with my other children. So anger at God was a big one for me.
I think shame and guilt kind of connect up to, what could I have done and all that. But one of the things I think about guilt and shame is we do want to figure out what we could have done so it wouldn't have happened, because we want to feel like we could control the world. So I think some of those feelings are us saying, if I can figure out what I did wrong, then maybe I could have saved them. I know, Heidi, you talked about some feeling like the wrong child died. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Well, I know that parents have guilt, but siblings also have guilt, and we have a lot of survivor guilt, because oftentimes we do feel like the wrong child died, because when your sibling dies, when Scott died, he took up a lot of energy and space in our family because we were all grieving for him. So it made me feel like, wow, maybe if I had died instead of him, this family wouldn't be so torn apart. And he was the only boy. And there was my mom and dad had three daughters. However, I mean, in hindsight, they would have grieved for me too. It doesn't matter who died, but there is some survivor guilt about why did they die and I'm alive, etc.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true. My son was in the back seat of the car with Nina, and normally she would sit behind me, and Dan would sit behind my husband. And for some reason, they switched that day, and so my son believes, oh my gosh, I was supposed to be sitting there. It should have been me, and he had a lot of guilt about that, and really had to deal with that.
That's tough.
So let's talk about some coping. The sadness and depression, sure, there is a lot of it. That first year you're pretty frozen, and the second year, people say the first year you grieve for your person who died, and the second year you grieve for yourself because you're like, wow, this is what my life's going to be like. Does that resonate with you, Cathy?
It does. It does. I know. I think part of the thing is that you've had all this support, and and you are in shock, and you're numb and despair, and then time goes by, and of course everyone goes back to their lives, and you feel alone. And the only thing that I have to say for myself is that I started going to Compassionate Friends 3 weeks after Nina died, and I've never looked back. And so I did get so much support from other people that had gone through, the death of their child too. And I found a new set of friends, and that we helped each other and supported each other. And that was, I believe, my lifesaver was going to Compassionate Friends. I really do.
And one thing we recommend is, because I went once and didn't go back, I hate to tell you.
Well, a lot of people do that, Gloria.
And somebody should have told us, they should have said to us, please try 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first time is pretty dramatic.
Physical exercise, meditation, quiet time, reading, creative activities, walking, writing, and journaling.
So I want to say one thing before Cathy, before you come in, I want to say one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi and I have worked with some medical people, and a man named Bessel van der Kolk has written a wonderful book called The Body Keeps Score. And one of the things that these people have found, and Bessel says, this actually changes your brain chemistry. So when you talk about what you do, Cathy, tell us some of the things you do.
I sat there and looked at this physical activity, and I thought, I really hate to exercise. There's a shameful thing for me to say I don't like to do exercise, but I know that it has many merits, and it revs up your endorphins like a natural antidepressant. And my son is actually a great example of that. He lost 200 pounds on his own. He started running. Now he's a 10, 11 mile a day runner, and he's off every single medication that he ever was on, and that's been going on for 3 years now. So I know what physical activity has done for him, and he always tells me, Mom, I feel like a new person after I'm done running.
I'm wondering if some of his weight gain had to do with the death of his sister Nina.
A lot of it had to do with that. Yes, it really did.
Yeah, I mean, we often eat after a loss because it's comforting to us, and it's so traumatic to have the death of a family member.
Now, Cathy, I know you're a writer and talk about your writing.
That probably, Gloria, was probably the thing that helped me just about more than anything. And the very interesting quick story about that is that a month before Nina died, I remember it as clear as a bell now, I walked into my office and she said, Mom, you know what? You really write well. She said, someday you're going to have to do a lot more writing. And I laughed at her, and I said, well, what are you talking about? What am I going to write about? I write a little thing about letter to the editor or something. He goes, no, Mom, writing is someday going to become really important to you. And when I actually sat down in the middle of the night one time when I couldn't sleep and I started writing, and all of a sudden that scenario came back to me. And writing has been probably the most therapeutic thing I can do, and journaling, that I actually have done a workshop for quite a few years on journaling as a healing tool.
I need to take another question here from a lady. Her son Simon died after birth, and then her other son Campbell died. And I think they were probably both stillbirths, I'm not sure. But she has 2 living children, and this is what she wants to know from us. Are there any tips? She feels very nervous about having them live, quote, normal lives, and helping them to understand that while I'm just as devastated by their brother's death, it doesn't change how glad I am that they're here. And she lives in fear that something will happen to the 2 living children. So she said, have you got any ideas of what I can do about that? Heidi, you want to log in on that?
Sure. One thing I would say is that when you are paying tribute to your children that have died, for example, maybe a toast, I would also say this toast is for my 2 children that have died in memory of them, and for my 2 living children who I'm so thankful are in my life today. So include the children that are still here also, because what happens is we always hear about our deceased sibling, and sometimes feel left out. So that's, and I think that the worrying a lot is a normal part of being a parent that's lost children. But you do have to be careful because kids often tell me, look, we need to be treated like normal kids. We need to have a normal childhood.
I think one thing that's important is to go talk about it like a compassionate friends, and you've got to talk about it. If you just hold it in, it is going to make you more fearful, and being fearful for a while is natural, but that starts to abate as time goes on. But if it's not abating, you need to go talk about it with people.
I mean, I think keep the lines of communication open. I mean, my son actually said to me, well, Mom, it wouldn't be so hard for you when one of us died because you've already been through it. And Nina was, so important to you. And I actually said to him and sat him down that it would be exactly the same thing for me if one of you died. I would be devastated. And to actually tell them that you understand how they might be feeling, but you love them as much as ever and as much as your child that died.
People count pictures too, right, Heidi?
Absolutely. You've got to be really careful because, we do go into our parents' homes and say, wait a minute, or if we're living there, why are there 35 pictures of Scott and one of me? What's this all about? Maybe I wasn't as loved. Maybe I'm not as significant.
Yes.
I mean, I might not tell my parents that, but I might be thinking that. So as a parent, to be very aware that your kids, your surviving children might be thinking this, and make sure there are as many photos out of the living children as there are of the deceased children.
And you might want to move the shrine out of the living room and put it in the bedroom or something. if you particularly as time goes on, you may want to pack some of their things in a memory box or repurpose rooms or give them away. There are all sorts of things about that. But moving on, I just wanted to say one thing about coping strategies. Walking 20 minutes a day will reduce your risk of stroke by 50%. 20 minutes a day.
I do walk. I do walk, Gloria.
Cathy, that's exercise.
Okay, and here's another comment from somebody who's given us their coping strategies, and we appreciate that. She does adult color pencil activities. I know a lot of people use adult color books now. My granddaughter just got one from a friend, and they're really fun. She creates iMovies from photos, and she's volunteering at an Alzheimer's group. Creating is so important,
creating really is. People will do scrapbooking and they'll, make cards. And this coloring thing, I actually did get a coloring book for Christmas from one of my kids, and I love it. I mean, I find it really relaxing.
Hug, listen to uplifting music, practice gratitude, a night out with understanding friends, and grief retreats. Heidi, can you talk about practicing gratitude, because I think that's kind of amazing research that's been done on it, and also hugging.
Well, the research shows that the number one quickest way to change the way you feel is to have gratitude for something in your life or someone, and it changes the way we feel very, very quickly. So it can be something very small, like I'm grateful tonight that we're all together on this webinar. The hugging research shows that if you get hugs for 20 seconds a day, it changes the way you feel. And you don't have to hug other people. That's the great thing. You can hug yourself. When we have a loss, often we're touch deprived. Those kids, Nina, Scott, they gave us a lot of love and a lot of hugs, and we don't have those anymore. So we need to give them to ourselves and love on ourselves. We've all been through a lot, having the death of a child or a sibling.
Night out with understanding friends. I love that one. And Heidi always says, all your, I always have said, find grief. You need to find people who understand grief and all. But Heidi made a comment once. Friends can be for different things. There can be friends who pick you up to go to a movie or to go dancing, and they may not be able to listen to your grief story, but that's not what they're there for. They're your dancing friends.
That's a good point. I like that a lot. That's very true.
Yeah.
Some of our friends are there to distract us from our grief and to give us a break from it. They're not there to talk about it. And for years I resented anyone that wouldn't talk about it. But now in hindsight I look back and say, you know what? Maybe that friend was there to make me laugh. Take me to a movie, to move me away from the grief. So some friends are great at grief support, and others are great at distracting you and giving you a break.
I think laughter is one of the best medicines. And, when you're really new in grief, you can't even imagine that you'll laugh again. But honestly, laughter is so good for us in so many ways.
Absolutely. Well, we've got one more comment. Somebody said that she's making a coloring book for grieving parents right now. And she's actually one of our
Wow.
Open to Hope writers, Laura Deal. Hi, Laura. Let others who have had similar losses support you, that Compassionate Friends, or Restoring Spirits Foundation, or if you're a bereaved widow, that's a great organization with Michelle Neff Hernandez. And find safe people who can handle grief. I think that's important, but I'll have to say that I've come to believe that maybe some of the people that can't handle grief are the ones that need to take you to a party. I think we need to be a little more open, especially when we're ready to move out, to be with people who maybe don't even know about our loss. Sometimes I found that I went back to school after a couple of years, and it was kind of a relief to be around people who didn't know I had a loss. So, yeah. Helping is healing. Be active in organizations related to grief. So, Cathy, what
and they
about
don't have
you?
to be related to grief.
Yeah, right.
You know,
right,
something
right.
that you have a passion for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big golfer. I like my golf ladies, and we hang out.
Well, actually, I'm also involved in the Strawberry Fest in our town because I'm the judge, one of the judges for the new girls that are, you know, like Nina 20 years ago, that are the royalty, and I'm a judging coordinator, and so I'm still involved in something that she really loves.
You know, these different things that you do and different organizations are great. Let's move on to the next slide, which is our grief resources, because I think that's really going to be important to look at those. And of course, I'm going to say the first one, the Compassionate Friends. It's an amazing organization. I want to say, if you have not been to a national conference, you really ought to try to come. Our next resource, which is us, opentohope.com. We hope you visit us on our website, because at opentohope.com, because we have, oh my goodness, we are on our 70th TV show now. So you can watch our TV shows, and we have about 350 radio shows on site, and we have over 5,000 articles. Yeah, we have a huge site, so we hope that you will come on there. And we love Compassionate Friends. We love partnering with you. It's just been fabulous. And then MAD, I want to talk about MAD, because Mothers Against Drunk Driving, particularly with Nina dying, you know, it's a really strong, wonderful organization that really advocacy to stop this drunk driving, and what they've done over the years is absolutely phenomenal. It's incredible what they've been able to accomplish.
It is.
And then getting to the allianceofhope.org. That is our friend Franklin Cook, and we love Franklin Cook. And we hope you'll go visit his organization. He is spearheading research and looking at suicide loss, because his dad died of by suicide. Visit Franklin's site and his newsletter. And then, of course, we want to say the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That is so important, with a telephone number there. You know, just call them up and have somebody that you can connect with if you're feeling desperate, and sometimes you just need to talk to a person. Well, I want to thank everybody for being on this webinar with us today, and particularly you, Cathy Seehuetter. You're an inspirational person, and I want people to know we're happy, aren't we, Cathy?
Yes. You know what, that's the one thing I always tell people is that, you know, you can have your loss and your grief for that person, but it coexists with joy. And you know, we have joy and happiness again that we never thought we would have. Yes, we miss our loved ones, and we love them, and love never dies. We always will. But we do feel joy again, and we do have hope, and that's a for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Heidi's not here to say it, but I'll say, as Heidi would say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. And God bless you on your journey. And good night.